So, hi everybody. My name is Naomi Harlem-Bacchus. I'm the Associate Director of Science Policy, and I will be the staff liaison for the Science Policy Committee. So all emails that you will get, and we will talk through everything today about the agenda and what time, meeting times and Zoom information that will all come from me. So you'll be seeing me a lot in your inbox throughout your term. So let's go ahead and go around the Zoom room and do some introductions. So I will just call on folks just to make it a little bit easier. Yvette?
Hi, I'm Yvette Seeger. I'm the Director of Science Policy at FASEB. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Doug?
Hi, I'm Doug DeLuzin. I'm Director of the Professional Development Career Office at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine.
Great. And if you could say which member society you are representing, that'd be great.
I'm part of the Genetics Society of America.
Perfect. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Ocañas. I'm an assistant professor at Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation, and I'm representing the American Aging Association as an early career representative. And I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Tiemeyer. I'm the director of the Complex Carbohydrate Research Center at the University of Georgia. I'm representing the Society for Glycobiology.
Wonderful. And we have two mics. So Michael Tiemeyer, do you go by
Thanks,
Mike?
Naomi. I wasn't sure which Mike. Hi, Mike.
Sorry.
Hi, folks. So I'm the other Mike. I'm Mike Lehman. I'm a professor director of the Brain Health Research Institute at Kent State University in Ohio. And I'm a FASEB board member representing the Society for Experimental Biology and Medicine. And I'm also VP-elect for Science Policy. So looking forward to working with you all.
Great. Judy?
Hi, Judy Cannon. I'm an associate professor at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, and I'm representing American Association of Immunologists. I've actually been on the committee as PC for a year, but I did not attend this last year, so I'm here this year.
Great. Thanks, Judy. Catherine?
Hey everyone, I'm Katie Wilkinson. I'm a professor at San Jose State University, and I'm representing the American Physiological Society.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Sally?
Hi, so I'm Sally Schwetman. I am the Director of Governance and Leadership Development here at FASEB. So I kind of handle a lot of the logistics for our board of directors and our committees, and getting all of our new volunteers onboarded is a big part of my responsibility. So thank you for joining us today.
All right, we will get started as we have other folks hopefully joining.
Just a minute, I always get the order wrong of how to share PowerPoints on Zoom. So here we go. Okay. There we go.
Okay, perfect. So today's session will begin with Sally providing just some background on how FASEB functions as a nonprofit. I will then transition and provide an overview of the SPC committee's charge and the objectives. We'll then review how the committee operates within FASEB's overall governance framework. And then we'll discuss member best practices, what resources are available to you as a committee member. At any time during the meeting today, feel free to raise your Zoom hand, use the chat function, however you feel comfortable, unmute yourself at a time where we're not talking over each other, but we're here as a resource for you.
Okay, so I'm sure you may be aware, but maybe not. So we'll just go over some background information so everybody's on the same page. So FASEB is made up of 26 member societies, and together it represents about 110,000 researchers. These societies include, but are in no way limited to, immunology, anatomy, molecular biology, developmental biology, genetics, and pharmacology. And our societies range in size from several hundred to over 10,000 members. We have two membership types, full and associate memberships. Full memberships are where your scientific society can be actively involved in steering FASEB and creating new policies and content. So if you're on the Science Policy Committee, that means that your society is a full member society. That's one of the benefits, is that you get representation on the Science Policy Committee and the Board of Directors. So we have 23 full member societies. Then we have 3 associate membership societies. This is much more passive, and these societies receive and access information from FASEB, but they don't sit on the committees, and they're not involved in the creation of the policy programs and initiatives. This is FASEB's strategic plan. It was adopted in 2018, and you will probably hear during your tenure on the SPC that things are changing. But as you can see, public affairs and science policy is very intentionally listed as the top item. And public affairs is really considered the heart and soul of FASEB. This is reflected, again, deliberately in our strategic plan as the first priority item. And our advocacy efforts in science policy and federal legislation are consistently cited by member societies as the primary reason why they join and retain their membership in our federation. FASEB does have a headquarters, but we are a remote first work environment. Our headquarters are located in Rockville, Maryland. And so I am currently at home. Naomi's at home, I believe. Yvette is in our actual office. But we try to be very intentional when we ask our staff to come into the office. So we've actually configured this space to where like all of the furniture is on wheels. So we really want to make sure that when we are in the office, we are working together and we're not just in the office to be on Zoom calls all day long. And another great thing about our headquarters location is, I think, that can correct me if I'm wrong, I think at least 6 or 7 of our member societies, including some of yours, are located in this same building. Which
I think it's 4 that are co-localized, but there are others in the neighborhood. So
yeah, we're
closer to a lot of them.
So just to give you an overview of how FASEB makes money, it's generally through these 4 different areas: publications, membership dues, science research conferences, and society management services. We're not going to get into the details on this, but just so you're aware that this is how FASEB brings in money. FASEB is a 501c3, so we're a nonprofit, and that doesn't mean we can't make a profit. It just means that any profit that is made, it doesn't go to individuals, it goes back into FASEB to support our programs and initiatives. And the Science Policy Committee and our efforts in policy and advocacy are one of those areas. So this chart just reflects basically when we say these are our 4 revenue sources, this just kind of breaks down what that actually looks like. So you can see this teal color, society management services, that's pretty small. Our membership dues are even smaller. It is an important source of revenue, but by far does not cover what we do here at FASEB. And you can see our publications and science research conferences really have an outsized proportion on FASEB's revenue. So when a global pandemic happens and severely impacts our ability to hold science research conferences, it impacts the entire organization. And I'm sure this is similar at many of your societies. But I will say, as I mentioned on the previous slide, this revenue does go to support our policy and advocacy efforts. And by looking at our strategic plan, them being top listed, top priority, it is always going to be a primary push of where these dollars are going to. Okay, I'm going to turn things back over to Naomi. Naomi, I don't know where Eric is, so are you okay?
He should be joining shortly. He just responded, so he'll be here in a couple minutes.
Turn things over, but before I do that, does anybody have any questions about the FASEB background or how we make money or anything?
I'm just curious about the budgeted scientific research conferences for 2023? It looks like they're a lot lower.
Yeah, so there's actually an answer to this question. So in 2020, when we had to switch, so these all happened primarily in the summertime. So when we switched to all virtual, there were a number of those SRC organizers that said, I don't want to go virtual, I just want to do it in 2021. And then in 2021, we were still in a largely virtual environment. I think we may have had 1 or 2 in-person SRCs. They said, no, I want to push back 1 more year. So last year we had over 50 science research conferences, and this year we're kind of back to normal with like low 30s is our fairly normal rate. But we are seeing, and you can see where this 2023, what we're expecting revenue-wise is lower than 2019. We are still feeling the impacts of inflation and post-pandemic travel weirdness, and lots of things still are impacting our SRC stuff, our SRC revenue, I should not say stuff. If you have more questions about that, I can put you in touch with our treasurer or even our director of our Office of Scientific Meetings and Committees. And they can walk you through all of that. And when I mentioned earlier, our strategic plan, you will likely see a lot of changes to that in the upcoming year. Part of that is you're just supposed to look at your strategic plan every 5 or 6 years. The other part of that is that FASEB has recognized that these revenue sources are not infallible, and we need to be making sure that we're adjusting our business model to keep pace with what's happening in the outside.
Thanks.
Okay, now Eric just joined, so I don't know if Eric wants to jump into these slides that we technically assigned him, or if we want to have Naomi do that. And Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry for being late. Trying to keep a lab together here, and we had a little bit of an issue this morning. But good morning, everyone. How are you doing? It's great to see everyone here, and trying to get some sort of compass as far as the SPC and the onboarding process. Naomi, would you like to take these slides as far as the charter goes?
Sure, if
you want me to do it either way.
You were assigned them, so you can simply do them yourself, but I'm also happy to hop in too.
I saw the assignment about an hour and a half ago. So
Okay.
you go right ahead and do that.
Okay, sounds good. So the Science Policy Committee Charter, which is linked in a volunteer portal that Sally will talk to you more about, but it really specifies the committee's charge, and that is really to monitor and advise FASEB's president and board of directors on public policy topics, federal initiatives, and other emerging areas of interest that's important to the Federation and its member societies. So to accomplish this, the SPC, we use a variety of strategies, as you can see from this list on the screen under objectives. We develop position statements on policy issues important to FASEB. This can be anything from like letters and comments to federal agencies, like a federal request for information, which we see a lot of those. We also oversee and provide guidance to the 2 subcommittees of the Science Policy Committee, and that is the Animals and Research and Education Subcommittee and the Training and Career Opportunities Subcommittee, and you'll learn more about those in a later slide. And among other items, we coordinate consensus efforts for the Federation. That's things like organizing workshops or events, conducting policy analysis, really just keeping our ear to the ground on everything that's happening on the federal agency level. All right, so moving on to your responsibilities as an SPC member, you each serve as a voting representative on behalf of your member society, and you also serve as a liaison of your member society. So we encourage you to regularly communicate with your member society about the work of the SPC that you're doing, how it benefits its members, just everything that you're learning during our monthly meetings. And per the charter, we request that you participate in the monthly SPC video calls at least 75% of the time. If you can't attend, it's fine. Just let me know ahead of time. It's perfectly okay. We know things come up and conferences and meetings, and you all likely have labs to run, so things happen. And we do request that you review the meeting materials beforehand and offer any input on the action and discussion items for that month. It's a very lively group, so we encourage you to be engaged and active on the calls, whether that's vocally or through the chat. As I am the committee staff liaison, I send the agenda packet with all the meeting materials the Thursday prior to our meetings, which we will talk through more next. All right, so for our SPC meeting calendar for the 2023-2024 year, items in teal indicate that they will be in person, and FASEB will, of course, reimburse flight and hotel, and all of that information will come from Sally and her office. Monthly virtual meetings typically occur on the 4th Tuesday of every month at 4:00 p.m. Eastern, and they last 1 hour. We do not, however, meet in December. It's just, the way the calendar works with holidays, it's just a little too crazy. So everyone gets December off. Each month, there are a number of SPC action items that we have to look at to keep FASEB operating that will then move forward for the board of directors consideration. So you can see on the chart here in July, we have an action item coming up for this month, and we also have one coming up in August. So there's a lot already going on. We look 2 to 3 months ahead because that's the way policy works. Additionally, there are some activities that happen at a prescribed time of each year, and these are listed. So in October, you'll see that in teal, we host our annual SPC symposium. We try to schedule this the same day as our regularly scheduled meetings, the 4th Tuesday of every month. So what we'll do is we'll have an in-person meeting in the morning on Tuesday, October 24th. We'll break for lunch, and then we'll move right into our symposium. And every year, the symposium focuses on a different topic. And it's usually up to the discretion of the Vice President of Science Policy. So that would be Eric for this year. So you'll learn more about that at this month's meeting, and we're excited about it. So we do strongly encourage you to go ahead and mark this date on your calendar if possible. And as I mentioned before, we try to send the agenda packets about 4 business days in advance. So you'll get an email from myself with the agenda packet, everything you need to know to review and prepare for the meeting that following Tuesday. So I'll also send a reminder the day of the meeting because I know schedules get hectic and there's a weekend in between. So don't worry about that. But everything should be available to you in that email. I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so here we're just going to provide some information about where science policy sits in the overall governance structure of FASEB. So this organizational chart really lays everything out. So as we've stated previously, we have several departments that report up to the board of directors. And this includes the Office of Public Affairs, which is indicated with the red arrow. And this is the department that science policy falls into. Now, from a broader perspective, the Office of Public Affairs has 2 branches, the Legislative Affairs and Science Policy and Strategic Initiatives. So we noted earlier that part of the SPC's charge is to consider items that come from the 2 topical subcommittees, and you can see that broken down here. We have the Animals and Research and Education Subcommittee and the Training and Career Opportunity Subcommittee, which really focuses on workforce policy. On the strategic initiative side, we have DataWorks, which focuses on data management, sharing, and reuse, and our Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion, or DEAI committee programs and initiatives. So everything that comes from these items, like the 2 subcommittees, they go up to the Science Policy Committee, and then the Science Policy Committee reports to the Board of Directors. And then this slide is just to give you, to put some names and faces to some folks that you'll hear about a lot. So it illustrates the leadership within the Office of Public Affairs. Jennifer Zeitzer is the director of the department at large, and Yvette Seeger is the director of Science Policy and Strategic Initiatives that branch within the office. Ellen Gua serves as our associate director and point person for all things legislative affairs. And I serve as the Associate Director of Science Policy, and Elvie Banda is our DEAI Program Manager. So getting back to the SPC more specifically, we wanted to share with you a few things that have come out of the SPC in the last year. So of course, this list is not comprehensive, but it gives you a good sense of the breadth of areas and advocacy strategies we engage in over the course of a year. Last year, we generated 15 fact sheets on animal research and the scientific workforce. This work comes directly from the SPC subcommittees that I mentioned earlier, and the SPC does consider these items and provides comments. The subcommittees also work on comprehensive reports that's on certain focused topic. For example, the animal subcommittee generated a report earlier this year on how to combat animal research activism and extremism. And most recently, we published a report on how member societies can engage with their early career representatives and make sure that we are as inclusive and representative of them as possible. And finally, we do organize several events over the course of the year. So last year, we hosted our first Animal Research Capitol Hill Day, and we also hosted our second congressional briefing on Capitol Hill. So now I will turn things back over to Sally to just explain how the SPC committee fits within the overall governance.
Thanks, Naomi. I just want to check in. Does anybody have any questions over anything that Naomi just shared? Okay. Okay, so this slide illustrates our governance hierarchy. So as you can see, the board is on top. And so this is because the FASEB board of directors are the fiduciaries. So they are the legally responsible body for the organization. So the board cannot and should not do it all. And our committees, like the SPC committee, are FASEB subject matter experts, and they really advise and guide the board's work. So you can see on this slide, it's supposed to illustrate the development of SPC actions from when we determine that we want to address something to when we are speaking publicly that this is FASEB's response to something or a policy statement, anything like that. So as Naomi mentioned earlier, the SPC will do a lot of different things over the course of the year, and including develop programs, respond to agency requests for information, and draft comments to proposed regulations impacting all sorts of things, from like researchers to grant applicants, you name it. They work on a lot of things. And so the board, as I mentioned, serves as the fiduciary for FASEB. And so they get final approval on anything coming out of a committee or a subcommittee that is going to be speaking on behalf of the Federation. So committee recommendations get to the board. So Eric his role is VP. Oh, and I forgot to replace the VP DEAI, but it should say VP SPC. Eric will present items for the board's consideration. So at next month's meeting, or at this month's meeting, Naomi already mentioned that you guys have items on the agenda. The SPC will review those. And then Eric, as soon as SPC says, yes, this is what we want, we are comfortable going forward to the board will review that decision. Eric will present it to the board. And then once the board says, yes, we approve this, then we do disseminate it publicly. So I can't remember, Naomi, what was that, an RFI response that we're going to be looking at in July, or what, comment to something?
Yeah, so next week's call, we have a RFI action item that we will discuss.
Yeah, so as soon as the board approves that final statement, then Naomi and her team will send it to the right agency or whoever needs to get it. And we will also post it on our website announcing that we did provide a response to that specific RFI. So the committee's work is incredibly important, and FASEB really values the role of volunteers and their expertise. So these items that are in gray and should say SPC committee. So I've been doing a lot of onboarding the last month, so not all these slides are getting changed as frequently as they need to, apparently. You really are the workhorses on these responses. Naomi has mentioned a lot about the subcommittees. Oftentimes when we get into the deliberation and development, those will involve the Animals and Research Subcommittee or the Training and Career Opportunities Subcommittee, and they will take a stab at drafting a response before it goes to the Science Policy Committee. We really do not want the board to relitigate the work of the committees. So we ask Eric, we ask the committee and Naomi as well, to provide the board with enough information that the board feels like by approving something, they are fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility of care to FASEB. So typically this means that Eric will run through a summary of the response, and we'll also talk about what process the committee took to draft that response. Did they go to other stakeholders? Did they go to one of the subcommittees? Anything like that. And if you're on the board, you get a whole conversation about these fiduciary responsibilities and how important they are. But we do, and this is always a fine line, we do not want the board to try to rewrite things. It's always a struggle, but they do greatly value the work of the committee. If there's something minor in scope that comes out of the Science Policy Committee, it can be approved by the Executive Committee, which comprises of all the officers of FASEB, and they meet weekly. So sometimes an RFI, they need a response sooner than the next board meeting we have on the calendar, or something like that will happen. And if it's something that FASEB has already approved a policy that statement is in line with, the executive committee can approve that in lieu of going to the entire board. We do make the rest of the board aware when that happens. But Naomi is very good about walking the SPC through what that time frame will look like, and if something needs to happen that's not this kind of typical way. The other thing about this slide, just to point out, is that even though it's one arrow going all the way through, that's not entirely accurate. And oftentimes the board is actually aware of what the SPC is working on or other committees are working on, and may even be asked to provide feedback on the framework that's being developed to approach a certain response. And part of the way that we keep the board from like redoing committee work is that we don't want them to be surprised at a board meeting about what's coming out of our committees or task forces. And myself, Naomi, Yvette, all the staff are here to make sure that this is working in concert and is effective, and we're not unduly holding anything up. Naomi or Yvette, do you have anything to add to this process? Okay, great. I can only say Naomi on my slides. So I'm going to keep going for a few more slides. This is kind of I don't know what I'm going to start calling these parts of the presentations, but the rules that govern our conduct as we serve as volunteers for FASEB. So in this past June, the board did adopt a volunteer code of conduct, and this slide just reflects the purpose and coverage for that code. You can find the full code under values and policies on our volunteer portal. This code is based on a model created by the Society's Consortium in Sexual Harassment in STEM. And so when you do look at it, you'll find that it speaks much more to aspirationally how we hope that we are behaving rather than outlining prohibitive behavior. So you'll see language that says, you know, honesty in the conduct and attribution of our work rather than don't plagiarize. So just the key provisions of the volunteer code of conduct. So the standards of conduct, which kind of outline how we hope our volunteers are behaving. It does go through the procedure for dealing with non-financial conflicts of interest. So I don't know if this will come up for the Science Policy Committee, but it outlines like if we're giving somebody an award or something like that, what are the steps that we should take to make sure that we are disclosing any potential conflicts. And finally, it does lay out the process for handling alleged violations. I skipped at the very top, or at the second from top in purple, the annual disclosure. We will be sending a form out to all volunteers that asks you to attest that you've read, understood, and agreed to abide by the volunteer code of conduct. So, and actually, Naomi, we need to talk about this because we need to talk about it at the SPC meeting next week with the folks that are not on this onboarding. And then we will send that disclosure out to all of the SPC members, probably the first week in August. Okay, so this slide is a little, it ties on what we talked about in our member responsibilities early in the session and in our volunteer code of conduct. But it's really meant to illustrate that the FASEB staff and our volunteers have complementary but very distinct roles. And it's helpful to kind of clear it up now. And so it keeps people's expectations in line with what should and what will actually happen. So as you can see over on the left, FASEB staff are responsible for facilitating the logistics necessary for the committee to achieve their objectives. So this is scheduling meetings, putting the agenda together, making sure we have the right technology. All of that stuff falls as a staff responsibility. And I think it's good for you all to realize, like, if at any time you don't think those logistics are being met, that is something staff should be doing. So please speak up about that. We also provide any clarity on governance issues that come up. So this is where I come in, where we can, clarify if board feedback is or approval is needed. And then just to make sure that we're in compliance with bylaws, board approved policies, any of those sorts of things. That's what I'm here for. We provide guidance on resources. So this is, do we have the money and the staff to handle something? And Naomi, myself, Yvette, we all report to Frank. So Frank Krause, the executive director and CEO, is our boss, and he is the one that will be reviewing our performance and not volunteers. So this will make statements will make a little bit more sense in just one second. So as an SPC member, you're really focused on identifying those issues. Now, staff will do a lot of this too, especially with the SPC committee, because they're the ones that are reading the Federal Register and finding out things that jump up. But it is absolutely volunteers' right and responsibility when you see something that falls within the scope of the Science Policy Committee that you think FASEB should be addressing, please speak up about that. And who you would speak up to is not necessarily staff, but really Eric Kelly and Mike Lehman, the volunteer leadership of the Science Policy Committee. If Mike and Eric think that, yes, we should do something about that, they will then get in touch with either the FASEB president or our executive director and CEO, who will then kind of map out how we will address that specific issue. So the important thing here is that we really want to make sure that we don't have volunteers telling staff what to do or staff telling volunteers what to do. We really kind of want to make sure we're falling within like the direct lines of communication. So volunteers talk to other volunteers and staff talk to other staff. So you will see this on the SPC calls where we do want you to focus on the subject matter and the science. And through that, you really will be responsible for determining the strategy and framework of how we will address the issues that come up. And just as I mentioned again, you report to the volunteer leadership. So this would be the vice president for science policy and also the president of FASEB, who is Miriam Nornstein. So are there any questions about this slide? Okay. The next slide's a little silly, but it's a discussion question. And so just, I would like everybody to think about, so question 1, SPC member Chris is very concerned about new laws prohibiting, oh, that should say DEAI concepts. I'm sorry, my brain has been a mess in like getting these acronyms correct on the right slide. Into university curricula, and what should Chris do to encourage FASEB to issue a statement? So based on the previous slide, who wants to take a stab at what Chris should do if he thinks FASEB should do something about this?
And should he contact the staff, you, Naomi, and raise this as an issue for SPC to take up?
Actually, he should contact Mike or Eric. So the volunteer leadership is they should be in touch with. That's why we do this discussion. Yeah, and we're happy. So, and then what we address staff to do, Judy, is that does often happen. So no one's going to get penalized if they contact a staff person about it. But then what we then ask staff to do is, if they are contacted, is to immediately go to the volunteer leader with jurisdiction over that issue. So you can bypass staff and go directly to Eric and Mike, who will then, they will loop staff, they will actually be in touch with Frank, who then it's Frank's job to kind of align staff with where they need to go. So then if you do, and this kind of goes to contact number 2, this does happen sometimes where somebody feels like a staff member didn't respond to their concern, but it's because as staff, we are charged with going back to the CEO, going back to the president and asking them, how do you want to respond to this? So just to keep those lines clear, in some organizations you can, and we haven't seen this a ton at FASEB, but there can be issues where volunteers get really, really upset at staff and lines can get crossed. It can also happen the other way where staff are upset at volunteers, and it's just remember volunteer to volunteer, staff to staff, and that really keeps things running smoothly. So Judy, you should be aware of this, but at every committee meeting, every board meeting we have at FASEB, we have an open mic period. And that is a great time. Like if you see something happening that you think FASEB should respond to, that's a great moment to bring it up, is during that open mic. And then at that time, how it should work, it does not always work this way, but how it should work is then Eric and Mike, whoever's the volunteer leader at that time, will then get in touch with staff and say, hey, Judy brought up this issue on the open mic. What do you think we should do with this? And what should happen is you will then hear what the plan is. And sometimes the plan is we can't respond to that for whatever reason. And you should hear that should be communicated to you. So if at any time you feel like you're not getting an answer at all, feel free to speak up. It should not be, you know, it's probably not malicious. It's just there's a lot of things going on, but it is on all of me, Naomi, Yvette, Eric, Mike, to make sure that things are transparent. Okay, and Eric has his hand raised.
Yes, just to follow up on Judy's response to that. When things would come to myself or to Mike, I just don't want you to get the wrong perception. The experience and the expertise lies in the faces of the staff that you see here. We may go to Frank and we may go to the board, but 99 times out of 100, we're going to rely on the expertise that you see on the screen. So it's more of the funneling of information than it is an expertise issue whatsoever. So our FASEB staff, and particularly in public relations and science policy, are some of the best in the country, and bar none. So they have the experience and the expertise to help guide not only the board, the VP and the president. So just wanted to make sure I put that plug in there.
Then I see Mike has his hand raised.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that, but also add in that we will circle back with you. That again, as Sally mentioned, we're really committed to transparency as a society, and there's nothing that's going to be done that we won't be open about in terms of explaining why the issue is moving on or why it can't for different reasons. But Eric and I are both committed to working with all of you in a really open manner. And I think it's an important core value to what we do.
Great. Thank you for adding those comments. I promise we did not pay them to say nice things. Okay. So some additional best practices just to keep in mind is to actively engage with your society. Naomi did mention this earlier. FASEB is not able to communicate directly with individual members of your member societies. We do rely strongly on our volunteers with being the liaison to their member societies. So you will receive information from FASEB where we're asking you to share that with your society, and that's why we're asking that. We don't have like an email list of all the members of FASEB member societies, so we do really rely on our volunteers to do that for us. Be present when you're on SPC calls. We all know how easy it is to get distracted when we're in Zooms, but your engagement is really important, and it really does make the quality of the work coming out of the committee so much better when people are engaged and providing their feedback and input. I would also say this goes to something Naomi mentioned. Make sure you're reading the agendas and reviewing those materials before meetings. And if you're not going to be able to attend a meeting, read that stuff over and feel free to send Naomi, Mike, or Eric your thoughts about something that's going to come up on the committee meeting, and they'll be sure to incorporate that into the discussion. Also, use video when you're able to, especially if you're speaking. We know we can't do it all the time, but when you're speaking, it does seem to help the experience when folks are on video rather than a little black box of Zoom. We do encourage and promote the use of inclusive and gender affirming language. This is something we're all still learning, we're all still working on, so please use our DEAI staff as a resource if you have any questions. LV Vanda, who's not on this call, but I do believe she joins a lot of the SPC calls, is a wonderful resource on this. And then finally, use technology, use Zoom's hand raising feature and the chat box. It really helps limit interruptions, and it does make sure that everybody is being heard. And okay, and with that, I think I am done for today, and I'm going to pass things on to Naomi to wrap things up. But before we get into all of these items, are there any questions from me? Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Sally. So just to wrap everything up, we wanted to show you some of the various resources FASEB offers for science policy. So most importantly is our science policy and advocacy page. You can find that pretty easily if you go to faseb.org, but you see the full URL there. But you can click through any of our science policy priorities as shown here in the picture, and it will take you to all the resources, webinars, and fact sheets that we've generated on these topics and that the SPC has considered over so many years. And additionally, the FASEB Office of Public Affairs, we write a bi-weekly newsletter that we also encourage you to subscribe to. It's called the Washington Update. We give updates on things like advisory committee meetings, upcoming events, new policies proposed by the federal agencies. So it's a great way to stay up to date on what FASEB is doing, maybe forward it to colleagues that may be interested. A lot of it comes up in SPC meetings in general, but it's a good way to just stay in the know on what's happening on Capitol Hill and at the agency level. And then the member clicks link takes you to our volunteer portal that we've mentioned a few times already today. And that lists all of FASEB's committees, their charters, and other information you may want to know about FASEB. And finally, we've provided direct links to 2 recent reports we recently published, and I mentioned earlier, one on animals and one on the workforce and early career representatives. And then, of course, we have to plug our social media. We have our LinkedIn, Twitter. We also have Instagram and Facebook. So make sure to engage with those as well and to stay plugged in in case you're more of a social media person and that's how you get your news. And then finally, here are the email addresses for your key SPC contacts. As a reminder, Eric and Michael should be your first point of contact for anything other than logistical matters. So their email addresses are here. Logistical questions like, are we meeting this month, or what time is the meeting again? That should be directed to staff and specifically myself. So for example, we have a call next week. You will get an email from me this week with the agenda packet. So you will get some practice right away, and this onboarding is just in time for you to prepare for next month's meeting, for this month's meeting. And I believe that's about it. So before we adjourn, are there any questions or concerns? You can always send questions to myself, Yvette, or Sally, but I think that's about it.
Well,
And Amelia and Judy, since you've been on the committee a while now, if you want to share any insights you've had while serving for several months now, that'd be welcome too.
Well, I guess just following up on my previous comment, I was surprised, maybe I just misread. The SPC manager did not respond because I've never really found that to be the case. So I figured if we contact you, you would let us know either way. And so that's worked well. This committee is been a pleasure to work here. And I'm happy to continue.
I think the biggest thing, just to clarify on like the situation. So obviously we're not going to just route a bunch of queries about a certain policy that's coming through just for the sake of it. I appreciate Eric and Mike acknowledging that we're the subject matter experts here. The big things where it gets egregious is when you, as a member, ask for a slide deck or ask for a report, and so and we're happy to do those. It's more a chain of command in terms of getting those assignments, because it used to be quite a free-for-all. We would get these requests, and one gift that we give you, even though we don't meet in December, is that there is a annual science policy report for the year that kind of sweeps everything that we did for a calendar year. So that is our gift in lieu of a December meeting. So that's the kind of thing, because we would get these requests for like slide decks. Oh, I need it in like 24 hours. And you can imagine we get these requests. There's the SPC committee, and there's also the board of directors. I also report to a DEAI committee and a DataWorks committee. So I have 100-some volunteers that are looking to get my time. And so that's what we're trying to control, not just answering basics. Hey, have you seen this?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that before I was on board at FASEB, there wasn't really any, I guess maybe traffic control for some of those things. And our staff are so wonderful that they want to be responsive, that some of like my job coming in was like, wait, don't respond to that right away. We need to get Frank looped in here. We need to get the president looped in here, just to make sure staff time is a resource. And we just want to make sure that it's where it needs to be. And if you contact any staff, I guarantee you they will respond. And so if we can try and put some guardrails there a little bit, we'll make sure that their time is spent where it really needs to be. And I will say that I think things have been going pretty well. I will say at the beginning of the pandemic, I think everybody was just at home and was stressed out about everything. And so we were getting a lot of, we should do this, we should do that, we should do this. And we did have to have a message go out from the president saying, we hear you, we know, but please let us know and we will talk to staff about it. But Yvette was getting like tons of emails like, what about this, what about this, what about this? So Mike T. Meyer,
Yeah, thanks. Just a logistical question. So the member clicks, I mean, logons for that. I had one a couple years ago, but I've kind of been away from FASEB for a year or two. Password, do I need to reinitiate that or get new passwords?
It should be the same. Let me show everybody where that is real quick. So you all will not need it quite as much. You will need it for some things like the volunteer code of conduct disclosure. So let me share my screen real quick. Yours should be the same as far as I know, but you'll go to this page. This is the URL that Naomi shared, and you'll just go to log in, and it should be your username is the email address that we have on file for you. And then if you've never logged on here before, you'll just go to reset password. So Michael, if you don't remember what your password was, you can just type in your username and do reset password. And if you have any questions about that, you can email me or you can email membersupport@faseb.org and we'll get you all squared away.
Thank you. So does that mean the major way that we share information with staff and with the committee is through email, or do we use the portal for sharing information as well?
It's still email for this committee. There are some things like it, like the volunteer code of conduct, when we're asking for RSVPs for the Science Policy Symposium and for Capitol Hill Day and stuff, we will need that login for member clicks, and we will use that because it ties back to your individual profile in our database. So it's helpful for those things. But for the committee, for the most part, things will be just regular email. And you do not have to log in to go. The member portal has a lot of different items there, like our bylaws, the full volunteer code of conduct, those sorts of things, and you don't need to be logged in to see that information. We will be posting this onboarding session on the portal, and that will be a login and will include instructions how to access it there. Well, without any other questions, I think we can give you 7 minutes back on this Monday. So thank you everybody for your time, and please don't hesitate to contact any of us if you have any questions.